The Silver Revolution is coming, a wave of change that will wash away the old world and leave only the truth. Join us as we document the turning points of history through a stunning 3D cinematic lens. Hit subscribe now and be a part of the new world order.
The dinner table was set for 12, and for the first time in years, every seat was filled. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a bottle of Côtes du Rhône, watching my friends laugh over something my coworker had said, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing I built. The apartment smelled like roasted garlic and fresh bread. The Edison bulbs were doing exactly what I needed them to do, and outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Nashville was doing its glittering Friday night thing. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look at it. I almost let it sit face down on the counter and went back to pouring wine and being happy. But I saw my dad's name on the screen, and something in my chest tightened the way it always does, even now, even after everything. Hey, your mom and I won't make it to your housewarming tomorrow. Your brother just got the keys to his place today, and we promised we'd help him settle in. You understand. Congrats on the new spot. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down, poured myself a full glass, and went back to my people. The next morning, I replied with 2 words, no worries. They had no idea that my new spot was a 2,400-square-foot penthouse loft that Interior Design magazine had already confirmed they were featuring in their spring issue. They had no idea their daughter had just been named one of Architectural Digest's 40 Under 40 in residential design. They had no idea because they never asked. They found out the same way everyone else did, when the issue hit newsstands in March. My dad called 4 times that day. My mom texted a paragraph with no punctuation. My brother, who had never once in 31 years texted me first, sent a string of fire emojis. I let it all go to voicemail. I grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 35 minutes outside Nashville, in a house that was always slightly too small for everything that happened inside it. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My dad worked logistics for a regional trucking company. My mom did bookkeeping part-time, and every conversation about money had a particular texture to it. Clipped and careful. Like everyone was aware of how thin the margins were. I have one brother. He's 3 years older. His name is the one my parents say when they're proud. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's just factually true. The way some things are true in families that nobody ever names out loud. My brother was athletic, loud, charming in that easy way that teachers and neighbors and uncles respond to. He filled rooms. He got the long hugs. He got the, that's my boy, and the benefit of the doubt and the second chances. I was quiet. I read a lot. I drew floor plans in the margins of my notebooks, starting at around age 9, rearranging imaginary rooms, thinking about what it would feel like to walk into a space and have it make sense. My mom called me her little architect once, when I was maybe 11, and I held on to that for years longer than I should have. By the time I was in high school, I'd figured out that there were 2 currencies in my family, sports and spectacle. I had neither. My brother played football, got recruited to play at a Division I school downstate, and our parents drove 6 hours round trip to every home game for 4 years. When I got into the honors program at my high school and was selected to present a design project at a regional competition, my mom said, "That's great, honey, but we already have your brother's game that weekend." She said it without hesitation. Like the math was obvious. I went to the competition alone. I took the city bus. I placed second. I called my grandmother from a payphone outside the venue. She was the only person who asked. The summer before my senior year, I got a letter. Full scholarship offer to study architecture and interior design at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Not a partial scholarship, not a financial aid package. Full tuition, 4 years, plus a small stipend for materials. I came downstairs that Saturday morning with the letter in my hand and my heart going faster than I'd like to admit. My brother was home for the weekend. My parents were at the kitchen table with their coffee and the newspaper. I said, I got a full scholarship to UT Knoxville. Architecture program. My dad looked up. He said, UT Knoxville? That's a good school. Then he looked back at the paper. My mom said, "You'll need to look into what the dorms are like. Some of them are in rough shape." My brother said nothing. He was eating cereal and scrolling his phone. I stood there for another few seconds holding the letter. Then I folded it back up, went upstairs, and cried into my pillow for 20 minutes. Not because I was sad exactly. More because something had just confirmed itself. And confirmation, even if something you already know, has its own particular weight. I packed my own boxes that August. I drove myself to Knoxville in my grandmother's old Civic. My parents came to see my brother's first practice of the preseason instead. College was the first time I understood what it felt like to be seen for the thing I actually was. My studio professors were exacting and occasionally brutal in the way that design professors are, but they were also the first adults outside my grandmother who looked at my work and said, "There's something here." My thesis advisor, a woman in her late 50s who had spent 20 years designing residential spaces in Chicago before coming back to teach, told me at the end of my junior year that I had an unusual instinct for how people move through a space, not just how it looks, but how it functions emotionally. I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I do now. I graduated with honors. My parents came to the ceremony. My dad shook my hand. My mom cried a little and took photos. It was the most attention they paid to anything I did in 4 years, and it lasted approximately the length of the ceremony. My brother had just gotten a promotion at the sales company he'd ended up working for, and at dinner that night my dad spent most of the meal asking him questions about his commission structure. I moved to Nashville 3 weeks later with my friend from college. I'll call her my roommate, because that's what she was for the first 2 years, and we split a 1-bedroom apartment in East Nashville that had exactly one functioning burner on the stove and a bathroom door that didn't fully close. I took a job as a junior designer at a small residential firm. The salary was $34,000 a year. After rent, utilities, my student loan on the materials stipend I'd taken, and groceries, I had about $200 a month left over. I didn't tell my parents any of that, not because I was ashamed, I wasn't, exactly, but because I knew what telling them would get me. Not money, not offers to help. Just a kind of vague, distracted sympathy, and then the conversation would move on to my brother's new truck, or his apartment, or whatever was happening in his life that week. So I just didn't bother. I made it work. I ate a lot of rice and beans. I wore my shoes until the soles separated. I picked up freelance work on weekends, staging consultations for real estate agents, furniture arrangement for people moving into new condos, anything I could do that was adjacent to what I actually wanted to do. I sent money to my grandmother when I could. Even when I couldn't really afford it, she was the only one who ever called just to ask how I was doing. The break came at the end of my second year at the firm. A client, a music producer who had just bought a historic Victorian in Germantown, fired the senior designer he'd originally hired and asked our firm to take over the project. My boss assigned it to me because I was available and because, I think, he expected it to be a relatively contained job. Touch up what was already started, keep the client happy, move on. The producer had specific taste, not showy, not the kind of taste that announces itself. He wanted the house to feel like it had always been lived in by someone interesting. He kept using the phrase earned beauty, and I knew exactly what he meant. I gutted the design the previous firm had done and started over. I worked 12-hour days for 3 months. I sourced materials from a salvage company in Memphis, custom millwork from a carpenter in East Nashville, vintage lighting from an estate sale in Kentucky. I talked to the producer twice a week for the entire project, and I learned more in those conversations about what clients actually need, which is not always what they say they want, than I had in 2 years of junior work. When the house was done, he brought in a photographer friend of his. The photos ended up in a local architecture blog. That blog post was seen by a writer at Nashville Lifestyles who reached out about a feature. That feature was seen by a producer at a design network who called me about a potential show concept. That was the call that changed everything. I want to be careful here about how I describe the next 3 years, because there's a version of this story that sounds like a montage. One lucky break stacked on another, obstacles dissolved, success delivered in a neat arc. That's not what it was. It was 3 years of saying yes to things I wasn't sure I could pull off. It was hiring an accountant when I couldn't afford one and doing a payment plan. It was firing a client who made my contractor cry. It was a pilot that didn't get picked up, then another that did. It was learning the difference between a business and a passion and figuring out how to hold both at once. The show, a design series focused on restoring historically significant homes in mid-size American cities, premiered on a streaming platform. 6 episodes. First season. The viewership numbers were quiet. The critical response was not. 3 months after it premiered, we were greenlit for a second season, and I was fielding calls from a production company in LA that wanted to develop something larger. I hired a business manager. I hired a small team. I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with my roommate and into a rental in 12 South while I figured out what came next. What came next was the penthouse. I'd been watching it for almost a year. A converted industrial building in the Gulch, a neighborhood that when I first moved to Nashville had been mostly parking lots and was now one of the most sought-after zip codes in the city. The top unit had been on and off the market. The owners couldn't settle on what they wanted to do with it. The space was raw and needed everything. That was exactly what I wanted. I closed on it in October. I designed the entire renovation myself, which I know sounds like bringing work home but felt the opposite. It was the first time I'd ever designed something purely for the life I wanted to live, without a client's preferences, without a budget shaped by someone else's priorities. I knew every choice was mine. Every material, every sightline, every decision about where the light would fall in the morning. I moved in February. I called it done in March, when the last piece, a custom dining table I'd commissioned from a woodworker in Chattanooga, arrived and fit the space so exactly it looked like the room had been built around it. I planned the housewarming for the first Saturday in April. The guest list had 40 people on it, people who had shown up over the years in the various ways people show up. A former professor, colleagues from my first job, friends from Knoxville, the producer whose Victorian had started everything, my contractor and his wife, the photographer who shot the show, my roommate and her boyfriend, my grandmother. My parents were on the list. Of course they were. I had called my mom 2 weeks out and told her the date. She'd said, "Oh, that sounds lovely. We'll plan on it." My brother was not on the list. That was a decision I'd made quietly and deliberately. Not out of spite, or not entirely, but because I had stopped pretending that our relationship was something it wasn't. We were not close. We had never been close. Pretending otherwise was a form of performance I'd finally stopped being willing to do. 3 days before the party, my dad's text arrived. "Hey, your mom and I won't make it to your housewarming tomorrow. Your brother just got the keys to his place today and we promised we'd help him settle in. You understand. Congrats on the new spot." I noticed, for what it's worth, that he got the date wrong. The party was Saturday, not tomorrow. He couldn't even keep the details straight when he was canceling. And I noticed, because I notice things. It's the thing I do. That there was no question in the text. No. "Will you be okay? Or can we reschedule?" Or even a perfunctory, "Sorry, we'll miss it." Just, "Your brother needs us. We're going." You understand. I did understand. That was the thing. I understood completely. I had been understanding this particular thing my entire life. I just finally wasn't going to pretend it hurt less than it did, or perform gratitude for the explanation, or text back something warm and accommodating that would make everyone feel better. "No worries," I wrote. 2 words. Accurate. Polite. Final. The party was the best night I can remember. My grandmother stayed until 10:30, which is essentially closing time for a woman in her late 70s, and she spent most of that time sitting at the custom dining table holding court with whoever sat next to her. She told my former professor about the time I stayed up until 2 in the morning as a kid, redrawing the layout of our house on graph paper because I decided our living room was in the wrong place. My professor laughed. My grandmother patted her hand and said, "She was always going to do something like this. I just had to wait long enough to see it." I heard that from across the room and had to look away for a second. We ate, we drank, we talked too loud and stayed too late. 3 people independently told me it was the most beautiful home they'd ever been inside. My contractor, who I've worked with for 4 years and who does not give compliments easily, looked around the living room at one point and said quietly, "You nailed it." That meant more to me than the magazine feature that was coming. That feature. Right, Interior Design magazine had reached out 6 weeks earlier. A senior editor wanted to include the penthouse in their spring issue, a piece on designers who live in their own work. I'd agreed. The photographer had come 2 weeks before the housewarming. It had all happened in a kind of parallel track to my regular life, the way these things do when you've been doing this long enough that opportunity starts to feel like weather, not guaranteed. But you learn to read the signs. The issue came out the first week of March. My phone rang before I was even out of bed. It was my aunt, my mom's sister, who I love, who texts me on my birthday and asks real questions about my life. She said, "I'm looking at you right now in the magazine at my dentist's office." I'm crying in the waiting room. "You have to tell me everything." That was the call I picked up. My dad called at 10 a.m., then noon, then 3. My mom texted at 2, a long paragraph about how proud they were, and how they'd always known and how they wished they could have been at the housewarming. My brother sent fire emojis. I sat with my coffee and looked out at the Nashville skyline and thought about what I wanted to do with those messages. Not in a strategic way, not what response will make me look gracious, but actually sat with it. What did I want? I wanted to feel something other than tired. Because that's what it was, underneath the satisfaction of the moment. Tired. Tired of the cycle of them not showing up, and then showing up when there was something to show up for. Tired of translating my accomplishments into terms they could understand. Tired of hoping the next thing would be the thing that finally made them pay attention in the ordinary way. The quiet Tuesday afternoon way. The "how are you, what are you working on, are you eating enough" way. The magazine feature was not going to fix that. Nothing was. I texted my aunt back and made plans to have lunch with her the following week. I let the rest go to voicemail. A few weeks later, I had lunch with a friend who asked me, very directly, whether I was okay. Not in the sympathetic but uncomfortable way people ask that question, when they don't really want an honest answer. She asked it the way she always asks things. Sitting across from me, full attention, waiting. I thought about it for a real moment. Then I said, "Yeah, I think I actually am." She raised an eyebrow. I told her about the texts I hadn't returned. About the voicemails I'd listened to once and then filed somewhere mental where I keep things I need to acknowledge but not act on. About the fact that for years I'd been living in a kind of low-grade grief about my family, not crisis grief. Not the acute kind, but the ambient kind that sits in your chest when you do something significant. And your first instinct is still to call the people who will most likely disappoint you. And then one day, I said, "You just stop." Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a confrontation or a letter you drafted 12 times. You just stop reaching towards something that keeps showing you, clearly and consistently, what it is. You let it be what it is. You turn around and look at what's actually there. What was actually there was 40 people in my penthouse who had driven across town on a Saturday night because they wanted to be in a room with me. What was there? Was my grandmother at the dining table laughing? What was there? Was my contractor saying "you nailed it" like he meant it because he did? That's not nothing. That's not a consolation prize. That's just a life. The one I built. With the materials I had. My friend was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Can I ask what you replied to your dad's text?" "No worries," I said. She laughed, then stopped, then said, "That's kind of perfect, actually." "I know," I said. "I know. My grandmother called me last week, a regular Tuesday, no occasion. She asked how the second season of the show was going. She asked if I was sleeping enough. She asked if I'd found a good farmer's market near the new place, because she remembered I used to go to one on Saturday mornings in East Nashville, and she hoped I hadn't lost that habit. I hadn't. There's a good one 3 blocks from the penthouse. We talked for 40 minutes. At the end she said, "I'm just so glad you kept going." "Me too," I said. "Me too." The apartment is quiet right now. Morning light is coming in off the skyline, hitting the dining table exactly the way I knew it would when I designed the east-facing windows. The coffee is good. The Season 2 script notes are stacked on the counter, and I'll get to them in an hour. My parents texted 2 days ago asking if we could maybe get dinner sometime soon, next time they're in Nashville. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I'm going to. And for the first time, not responding doesn't feel like a wound I'm tending. It feels like a door I've simply stopped standing in front of, waiting for someone to walk through. Some things aren't punishment. They're just clarity. And sometimes clarity is the quietest, most permanent thing you'll ever build. I've thought a lot about that text, the one my dad sent 3 days before the party, getting the date wrong, not apologizing, just explaining, as if explanation and justification were the same thing. What strikes me now isn't the anger I used to carry around it, it's how long I spent trying to earn something that was never actually being withheld because of anything I did. I kept thinking, if I just achieve enough, if the next thing is big enough, visible enough, undeniable enough, they'll see it, they'll adjust, the scorecard will finally balance out. That's not how it works. I know that now in a way I didn't at 22, or even 27. You don't get to withdraw from accounts you never deposited into. And no accomplishment, not the scholarship, not the show, not the magazine feature, was ever going to make my parents into people who showed up on ordinary Tuesdays. That was a fixed variable I kept treating like it was adjustable. What I could adjust was where I directed my energy. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're growing up in a house where love feels conditional and attention feels rationed. They don't tell you that the people who keep reaching toward you, quietly, consistently, without needing something from you in return, those are the ones worth building toward. My grandmother called on regular Tuesdays for years before I understood what that meant. She didn't call because I'd been on television, she called because she wanted to know if I'd found a good farmer's market. That's it, that's the whole thing. Intelligence alone didn't get me out of Murfreesboro. Talent didn't either. What moved me forward was something less glamorous. The willingness to stay in rooms that were hard, to keep working on problems that didn't have clean solutions, to be wrong and adjust and try again without needing anyone to watch me do it. The $34,000 salary year. The one functioning burner. The shoes with the separated soles. None of that was a setback. It was just the cost of admission, and I paid it because I had decided, somewhere between that city bus ride to the design competition and graduation night at a dinner table where nobody asked me a single question, that I was going to build something real even if I had to build it entirely alone. You cannot control whether the people who were supposed to show up actually do. You can control what you do with the space their absence creates. I filled that space with work, with chosen people, with a dining table I commissioned from a woodworker in Chattanooga that fits the room like it was always meant to be there. My dad's voicemail is still sitting in my phone, undeleted. I don't know exactly why I haven't cleared it. Maybe because I'm not doing this out of anger anymore and I want to remember that. Anger would have been easier in some ways, cleaner, with a clear target and a satisfying arc. This is quieter than anger. It's just a decision, made with clear eyes, to stop waiting. Some things don't resolve. Some relationships don't transform into what you needed them to be, no matter how much you accomplish, no matter how long you wait. And accepting that, really accepting it, not as defeat but as information, is maybe the most useful thing I've ever learned. The morning light still hits that dining table exactly right. I still go to the farmer's market on Saturdays. My grandmother still calls on Tuesdays. That's enough. That's actually more than enough.